I never imagined that the day my younger sister walked down the aisle would become the day my life cracked open in front of hundreds of strangers. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, a single mother of one boy, and for most of my life I've carried the invisible weight of being the other daughter. The one who didn't shine quite as bright, the one who always stood a step behind watching as my family poured their affection into the younger child, who somehow could do no wrong. I told myself for years that I didn't mind, that being the background character in my own family's story wasn't so bad. After all, I had my son Daniel, who was my entire world. He came into my life when I was barely out of college after a man I thought loved me disappeared the moment he realized I was pregnant. That betrayal should have broken me, but instead, it gave me Daniel, a boy with wide eyes and a heart too big for his small body. He became the reason I got out of bed when my parents looked at me with disappointment, the reason I kept working double shifts while my sister Julia was celebrated for her scholarships, her beauty, her charm. Julia was 5 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, she became the crown jewel of our family. My mother adored her, my father doted on her, and I became invisible. People like to say families don't pick favorites, but mine did. They picked Julia. Always Julia. When Julia announced her engagement, it was as if the entire household had been waiting for this fairy tale. My mother cried tears of joy, my father ordered champagne, and my phone buzzed with relatives gushing about the perfect couple. Meanwhile, I was working late at the diner, tying Daniel's shoelaces with one hand while balancing plates with the other. No one asked how I felt. No one noticed that the idea of another party where I would be shoved into the corner forgotten filled me with dread. Still, I showed up. I bought the dress I couldn't afford, pressed Daniel's little shirt until it looked brand new, and told myself I could endure one more night of being wallpaper in my own family's story. For Daniel's sake, I had to. He deserved to see his mother strong, not crumbling under the weight of old wounds. The wedding day was dazzling, I'll give them that. The hall glittered with chandeliers. Roses cascaded from every corner, and Julia looked like a princess in her gown. Guests gasped, photographers clicked, and my mother beamed, as if she herself were the bride. I clapped with everyone else, hiding the ache in my chest, holding Daniel's hand tightly so I wouldn't drift into bitterness. It wasn't until the speeches began that the night turned from painful to unbearable. Julia stood glass in hand, her smile wide and practiced. She thanked the guests, gushed about her new husband, and then with a mischievous grin she turned her attention to me. And of course, she said, we can't forget my big sister Claire. She's always been, well, strong and independent. Maybe too independent, since no man has ever really wanted to stay. The room erupted in laughter. I froze, heat crawling up my neck. Daniel's small hand slipped from mine, and I glanced down to see his face crumple in confusion. My mother was laughing, my father was chuckling, and Julia basked in the attention like it was sunlight. My humiliation was her entertainment. I wanted to disappear, to grab my son and run out into the night away from their jeers. But my feet wouldn't move. My throat burned with unshed tears, my fingers clenched around the napkin in my lap until it tore. I felt stripped bare, my years of sacrifice reduced to a cruel punchline at my sister's fairy tale wedding. And then it happened. The groom, Michael, rose from his chair. His smile was gone, his eyes cold and sharp as they swept over the room. He took the microphone from Julia's hand with a firmness that silenced even the loudest laugh. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. The laughter died instantly. Guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the bride and groom, sensing something was unraveling before their eyes. I couldn't breathe. My sister stared at him wide-eyed as he turned to face me, and in that charged silence I knew something was about to be revealed, something that would turn this perfect wedding into something no one in that room would ever forget. Michael's hand gripped the microphone like it weighed 100 pounds, but his voice carried steady, deliberate, each word slicing through the wedding hall. I won't let this continue, he said, turning his gaze on Julia, my sister, his bride. Mocking your own blood, humiliating her in front of your family, in front of her child. That isn't love, Julia. That isn't the woman I thought I was marrying. The air froze. A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion colliding with curiosity. I sat there still as stone, my heart pounding so loudly, I was sure Daniel could hear it. My sister's smile faltered her perfect facade, cracking in front of the hundreds of guests who had come to celebrate her. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago," he replied. Then his eyes, sharp and unrelenting, shifted to me. "Claire, you deserve better than this. You deserve respect, and if no one else in this room will say it, then I will." My breath caught. The sting of humiliation twisted into something else: shock, disbelief, a flicker of vindication. The crowd stared at me suddenly, seeing me not as the forgotten sister, not as the punchline, but as a woman whose dignity had been trampled, and who now had someone speaking on her behalf. Julia's face turned red, her carefully applied makeup no match for the storm rising within her. "You can't do this here," she hissed, snatching at the microphone. But Michael held it tight, his knuckles white. "Yes, I can," he said louder now, "because I cannot stand by and marry into cruelty. I've seen pieces of it before, the way you talk about your sister, the way your parents look down on her for being a single mother, and I ignored it, thinking maybe love would change it. But tonight, in front of everyone, you proved me wrong." Gasps echoed across the hall. My mother's face drained of color, my father sat rigid, and Julia's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel pressed himself against me, his small hand clutching mine again, as if sensing that everything was about to unravel. Michael's words spilled like a dam breaking. He revealed what I had long suspected, but never dared to say out loud, that my family's cruelty toward me was no secret that others had noticed, and that the man my sister was marrying had seen it too. "Claire has raised a child alone with no help from the people who should have supported her the most. She's stronger than any of us, and yet she's treated like she's less. I won't marry into a family that celebrates cruelty and mocks sacrifice." Julia lunged for the microphone again, but Michael stepped back, his jaw set. "If standing up for her means ending this wedding, then so be it." The room exploded into chaos. Guests whispered furiously, some standing to leave, others craning to see if this was some twisted performance. My mother rushed toward the stage, her voice sharp with panic, but even she couldn't stop the unraveling. I sat frozen, unable to process what was unfolding. My humiliation had transformed into something else entirely, vindication mixed with horror. I had come prepared to endure the quiet cruelty of being ignored, not the violent tearing down of my sister's fairy tale. And yet, as I held Daniel close, I felt the smallest flicker of justice. For once, someone had spoken aloud what I had carried in silence for years. Julia's voice broke as she turned to Michael. "You can't do this to me. Not here, not now." But he only shook his head, laying the microphone down on the table with a finality that silenced even the whispers. He walked past her, past my stunned parents, and for a moment his eyes met mine. There was no triumph there, only a grim honesty, as if he had reached a breaking point of his own. And then he walked out of the hall. The silence that followed was louder than any laughter had been. Julia stood trembling, abandoned in front of the crowd, her perfect wedding gown suddenly nothing more than white fabric wrapped around a broken dream. My mother rushed to her side, my father stood in stunned silence, and guests began filing out, their faces twisted with shock and pity. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have reveled in the downfall of the sister who had humiliated me. But as I looked at her standing alone under the weight of her own cruelty, I felt something I hadn't expected: grief. Not for her happiness, but for the years we had lost to jealousy, favoritism, and bitterness. I held Daniel tighter. His voice was small but steady as he whispered, "Mom, are we going home?" "Yes," I said, my voice breaking, "we're going home." But I knew that what had shattered tonight could never be put back together. Not my sister's marriage, not my parents' illusions, not the fragile bond between us. Something far darker had been exposed, and its shadow would stretch long into the years ahead. The drive home that night felt endless. The city lights blurred through the car windows as Daniel leaned his head against my shoulder, exhausted from the chaos he had just witnessed. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other brushing his hair back gently, trying to steady both of us. My heart was still pounding, my mind replaying the scene in the wedding hall, the laughter, the cruelty, and then the shocking collapse of it all. When we pulled into our small driveway, I sat in the car longer than I should have, staring at the dim glow of our porch light. My body was present, but my soul felt dislocated, floating somewhere between fury, sorrow, and disbelief. My sister's wedding had ended in ruins, and though I hadn't caused it, I had been at the center of the storm. The phone rang before I even set down my purse. My mother's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I thought of letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity, or maybe guilt, made me answer. Her voice was sharp, shaking with rage. "Claire, what have you done? You couldn't let Julia have one perfect day. You had to let him humiliate her like that." I swallowed hard. I didn't do anything. He spoke the truth. "If that hurt you, maybe you should ask why." "Don't you dare turn this on us," she snapped. "You've always been jealous, always bitter. And now because of you, Julia's marriage is ruined before it even began." The words stung, not because they were true, but because they carried the familiar weight of every accusation I had endured growing up. Jealous, bitter, never enough. I hung up before she could say more, my hands trembling, my chest tight. That night, as Daniel slept peacefully in his bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea. The silence pressed in heavy. For years I had carried my family's disdain, quietly swallowing it in the name of keeping peace. But after the wedding, there was no going back to silence. The truth was out, and nothing could undo it. The following days were a blur of phone calls, whispers, and blame. Relatives reached out, some expressing shock at Julia's cruelty, others parroting my mother's version of the story that I had orchestrated my sister's downfall. Invitations to family gatherings dried up overnight. I was painted as the villain, the bitter sister who couldn't stand seeing her sibling happy. But Michael's words echoed in my mind. He had seen it. He had spoken it aloud. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. My suffering had been real, and finally someone had validated it in front of everyone. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a letter, handwritten, shaky, but unmistakable. It was from Michael. "Claire, I'm sorry for what happened at the wedding, though I don't regret telling the truth. You didn't deserve what your family has done to you. I saw it for months how they dismissed you, mocked you when you weren't around, and celebrated Julia at your expense. I thought I could ignore it, thought maybe love would blind me to it. But when Julia humiliated you at the altar, I knew I couldn't spend my life tied to that kind of cruelty. For what it's worth, I hope you know you're stronger than all of them combined. You've built a life, raised a child, and survived without the support you should have had. That deserves admiration, not mockery. Don't let them convince you otherwise." I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling. Tears slipped down my cheeks, not because his words fixed the years of hurt, but because they acknowledged them. For so long I had lived in the shadows of my family's judgment, doubting my worth. But here was someone who had seen me clearly, and who had chosen truth over illusion, even when it cost him everything. That night, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of a photo album, the one place I kept pieces of myself I didn't want to lose. It became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there could be fragments of light. But with light came shadows. Julia didn't speak to me for months after the wedding. When she finally did, it wasn't with an apology. It was with venom. "You ruined me," she spat over the phone. "Everyone thinks I'm the monster now. I hope you're happy." I wanted to tell her that she had ruined herself, that all I had ever wanted was her respect, her love, a sister who stood beside me instead of above me. But the words lodged in my throat, because deep down, I knew she wasn't ready to hear them. So I let her rage, and I began to rebuild. There were days when guilt gnawed at me, guilt for the shattered wedding, for the broken pieces of a family already fragile. But then I would see Daniel's smile, hear his laughter, feel his arms wrapped tightly around me, and I knew where my loyalty lay. He was my family. He was my proof that even when abandoned, mocked, and betrayed, I had created something pure, something worth fighting for. The night of Julia's wedding would forever be a scar in my memory, but scars are proof of survival, not weakness. And I was done letting mine define me as less. Months passed, and yet the shadow of that night lingered everywhere I turned. At work, coworkers whispered about the scandalous wedding. In the grocery store, familiar faces gave me sympathetic looks, while others turned away, believing the story my mother spread that I had somehow engineered the humiliation. But the most painful part was the silence from my own family. No calls, no invitations, no gestures of reconciliation. It was as if I had been erased, exiled from the very people who should have been my anchor. Daniel noticed, of course. Children always do. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he looked at me with those wide, earnest eyes and asked Mom, "Why doesn't Grandma talk to us anymore? Did we do something bad?" His innocence pierced me more sharply than any accusation could. I brushed his hair gently, fighting the lump in my throat. "No, sweetheart. We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people can't see the truth right away, but that doesn't mean we stop being good." After he drifted off to sleep, I sat awake for hours, replaying the events, questioning myself. Had I ruined Julia's wedding? Had I allowed Michael's defense of me to spiral into destruction? Or was this just the inevitable collapse of a fragile family built on favoritism and lies? Each question clawed at me, but deep down I knew the truth. Julia's cruelty had finally been exposed, and the mask my parents wore had been ripped away. The destruction wasn't my doing, it was the harvest of seeds they had planted long ago. Then one afternoon, an unexpected knock came at my door. When I opened it, I found my father standing there, older somehow, his posture heavy, his eyes tired. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. He had never come to my home before, never crossed the distance that separated me from the rest of the family. Finally, he spoke. "Claire, may I come in?" We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had cried alone so many nights. His hands shook slightly as he held his coffee, his silence longer than his words. At last he sighed. "Your mother won't forgive you. She blames you for everything. But I saw what happened. I saw how Julia mocked you. I should have stopped it. I should have defended you." His voice cracked, and for the first time in my life I saw regret in his eyes. Something inside me softened, but it also burned. "All those years, Dad," I whispered, "you let them treat me like I didn't matter. You let me carry everything alone. And now when it's too late, you want to say you're sorry." His eyes dropped to the table. "I can't change the past. But I don't want to lose you completely. I don't want Daniel to grow up thinking his grandfather never cared." I didn't know what to say. Part of me longed for his words, for any sign that I had been seen all along. But another part of me raged at the decades of silence, the nights I cried myself to sleep, the mornings I forced a smile while they praised Julia. Could one apology erase all of that? No. But maybe it could be the first fragile step toward something new. When he left that evening, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I had heard words I'd waited a lifetime for. Heavier because I knew my mother's heart would never change, and Julia's bitterness would only deepen. Still, for the first time, I realized I didn't need their validation to define my worth. Weeks later, I received another letter from Michael. This one was longer, more personal. He wrote about the fallout after the wedding, how his own family had pressured him to smooth things over, how Julia had begged and pleaded, only to reveal more of the cruelty he could no longer ignore. "I chose to walk away, Claire," he wrote, "not just from Julia, but from a family dynamic that was built on cruelty and silence. I don't know where life will take me now, but I want you to know what I said that night. I meant it. You are stronger than any of them." I read his words in the quiet of my living room, Daniel asleep upstairs, and I felt tears sliding down my face. Not because I wanted him, not because I dreamed of some impossible romance, but because for the first time in my life, someone had looked past the shadows and seen me clearly. And slowly I began to see myself too. I started taking small steps, joining a support group for single mothers, daring to laugh again with new friends, even enrolling in night classes to finish the degree I had abandoned years earlier. Each choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen by years of neglect. The scars remained, of course. They always will. But scars aren't just reminders of pain, they're proof of survival. Proof that I endured, proof that I lived. And as I watched Daniel grow stronger, braver, more confident each day, I realized the truth that my family had never given me. I was enough. I had always been enough. Spring came, and with it a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in years. The air was warmer, the days longer, and in small ways, life began to soften around me. Daniel's laughter filled the house again, lighter than it had been since the wedding. He made new friends at school, joined the soccer team, and each time I cheered from the sidelines, I thought, this is our life, now, ours, not theirs. But even as I built something new, the past lingered like an echo. One evening, Daniel brought home a school project drawings of his family. He had sketched me with a big smile and himself holding a soccer ball. But when I asked if he wanted to draw Grandma or Aunt Julia too, he shook his head firmly. No, he said. They don't like us. His words cut deeper than he knew. Children always see the truth without the filters adults use to disguise it. The truth was, he was right. My mother hadn't spoken to me since that furious call after the wedding. Julia had buried herself in denial, painting me as the villain to anyone who would listen. I heard whispers that she had tried to rekindle things with Michael, but he refused moving out of town entirely. And yet instead of facing her own cruelty, she chose to cling to her bitterness, blaming me for everything she lost. Then one afternoon I received an invitation in the mail. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was for my cousin's engagement party, signed by my mother. I almost laughed at the audacity. After months of silence, after all the accusations, here was a thin white card pretending as if nothing had happened. I didn't know if it was an olive branch or a trap, but something in me stirred. I decided to go, not for them, but for myself. The night of the party I wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant, but one that made me feel steady whole. Daniel stayed with a neighbor, and as I drove to the venue I reminded myself that I didn't need their approval anymore. I was walking in not as the forgotten sister, not as the black sheep, but as a woman who had survived everything they threw at her. The moment I entered, heads turned. Conversations hushed. My mother stiffened at the sight of me, her lips pressing into a thin line. Julia avoided my eyes, clinging to her friends as though their laughter could shield her. I expected the weight of their stares to crush me, but instead I stood taller. Let them look. Let them see the woman they had tried to erase but couldn't. Later in the evening, I stepped outside for air. The night sky was clear stars, scattered like fragments of hope across the darkness. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Claire. I turned to see Michael standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his eyes steady. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence heavy with everything unspoken since the wedding. Finally, he said, I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to come. I admitted, a small laugh escaping me. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. You look stronger. I feel stronger, I said quietly, for the first time in a long time. There was a pause, then he added, I don't regret what I did, not one word of it. I just wish it hadn't hurt you in the process. I shook my head. You didn't hurt me. You gave me something I never thought I'd have, the truth spoken out loud. For that I'll always be grateful. We stood there a while longer, two people bound by a night that had changed everything. There was no romance in the air, no lingering fantasy, just mutual respect and perhaps a shared understanding of what it meant to choose truth over illusion even when it cost everything. When I left the party that night, I felt lighter. My family hadn't changed. My mother's coldness still cut, Julia's bitterness still burned. But I had changed. I no longer needed them to validate my worth. I no longer carried their cruelty like a wound that would never heal. As I drove home, I thought about the life ahead of me. It wouldn't be easy, single motherhood never is. But I had survived worse. I had walked through betrayal, humiliation, and abandonment, and I was still standing. More than standing, I was growing. And that's when I realized the truth. I wanted to leave behind, not just for Daniel, but for anyone who might hear my story. Families can wound us deeper than strangers ever could, but their cruelty doesn't have to define us. Our scars don't make us weak, they make us survivors. And sometimes survival itself is the greatest revenge. So if you've carried pain like mine, if you've been mocked, forgotten, or pushed aside by the very people who should have loved you, know this: you are still enough, more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, Please like this video, share it with someone who might need the reminder, and subscribe for more stories like mine. And don't forget to leave a comment. I'd love to hear your story too, because your voice matters.